We all know the gender gap is alive and well, but digital has the potential to change some things. I'm joined by Accenture's CEO of North America, Julie Sweet. So good to see you.
Great, thanks for having me, Rhonda.
And you guys are out with a study that is very, very interesting about how the gender gap can be closed by digital fluency. So what are we talking about in terms of how that gap gets closed?
Well, what we looked at in our research was if you have basic digital fluency, what would the effect be for women? And what we found was that digital skills could really help close the gap. In developed nations, it can do it half the time. So the World Economic Forum says that the gender gap will be closed in 50 years. If you double the pace of digital fluency for women, it can be closed in 25 years. We think that's really exciting.
It is, because women can also in some ways control that. So when you say digital fluency, what do you mean by that?
By digital fluency, it's really about basic skills. It's about how you're using devices and technology in your everyday life, in your personal life, in education, and in work. And that's really what excites us about this research, because it's not about turning every woman into a computer scientist. It's really about basic digital skills, and it's consistent with what we need in the workplace as well.
So this is something as simple as downloading an app on my phone.
Yes, although you wouldn't qualify as digitally fluent if that's the only thing you can do.
So I would also maybe be understanding new software programs my company gives me to work on.
Right, you'd be able to not necessarily understand them technically, but be able to use them. So what we looked at was the numbers of devices that you use, the frequency that you use them, and the purpose. And so the more devices and purposes, so making payments online, for example, as well as having to work on a computer or use a mobile device at work, all of that sort of looks at, and then you get a score for like sort of how digitally fluent you are.
And you actually rated areas of the world, and in the US actually our digital fluency is pretty high compared to other places.
Yes, and it's probably not that surprising, right? So the US was the most digitally fluent country, and on the very opposite end of the spectrum you had India. If you just think about internet penetration, you need the internet and high penetration to be digitally fluent. It would make sense that that India would be much, much lower than the United States, where we have high penetration and also a lot of just applications and companies here, headquartered here, that are all about digital.
Beyond the basic, I would almost call that a basic need now, internet service, the way we operate, but what's the holdup, I guess, in achieving digital fluency? Is it not having the technology or not having the skill set or not wanting to learn the skill set? Or is there some blockage from a business or company in making employees more fluent?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, and it ranges a little bit if you're in developed versus developing. So in a developing area, it's much more about internet access as well as having devices, the economic means to have them, and then add on that training. In developed nations, it's less about access and cost and more about use, training, sort of being used to it culturally. And our research did show that men are more, there's a higher percentage of men who are continuously learning about digital than women. So there's also sort of an educational point of view that you have to do about educating women that it's important.
So what will Accenture do with results like this in this survey? How will you use that to change the way you think about things?
Well, in a couple of ways. So first of all, it's very top of mind for our clients. When we're with CEOs, they're no longer really talking about, they know they need to do digital transformation. It's much more about execution. And what we see is there is a real concern about how do you shift an entire organization. And as well, the fact that all of these jobs need basic skills. And so it's a real sort of way to show companies and CEOs about the need to have training for their employees and the effect it can have, because diversity and having a wider talent pool is very important to all companies. And so being able to both show it's important to meet their digital transformation needs, to widen the talent pool, and the effect businesses can have in their own companies and also in the investments they're making in their communities.
Julie Sweet, it's been great talking to you and learning about the results.
Great, thanks for having me.
I'm Rhonda Schaffler for The Street.